One of the things people ask me about is how I slot my Simmons for bleeders. Now, the reason I slot them is because when I first started shooting this old land shark, that's the head I started shooting. It came slotted. It was slotted from the factory. It had a slot that was probably put in the blade before the blade was attached to the ferrule, because it came all the way down to the ferrule. And you had these bleeders that came, and they still make these bleeders, and they look like this, and they would go through the blade and drop down, and they fit the ferrule just perfectly. Now, I still slot some in that manner, but I'd use two different processes, two different ways of slotting. These short heads, these heads that's really short from tip to ferrule, like this head, the land shark, and this timber shark is real short in there. I don't slot them in that area the way they were originally slotted. I like to come down on the ferrule on them and put a slot in the ferrule. Just slot the ferrule, and I'll show you what I put in there. Now these safaris, I slot them the way the old land sharks used to be slotted. I slot them in the blade. They have so much blade up there, and these original bleeders work so well. I have to do a little bit of modifying, because when I slot, I don't slot all the way to where the little ferrule starts, so it makes the ferrule kind of comes in and has a little shelf on it, and then I'll have a little bit of blade there right above it. So I have to kind of modify the bleeder a little bit, cut a little slide in the center right here, and that makes it drop in through there and drop down and have a good flush fit on that ferrule. And that is a real good solid system. Now on these tree sharks, these actually probably do the best of any of them, but I have to do more modification to the bleeder to really get it to work right. I have to kind of cut the tip, and this one I kind of have to work it out, which in my opinion, the more work you have to do with that bleeder, the weaker it gets. And I like a weak bleeder. I like a bleeder that is going to break on bone. I don't like a really durable bleeder. All the years I shot the land sharks with bleeders, I never had a bleeder to break. They're just that durable. And I don't know whether that's good or bad. I think it's a little bit bad. I actually like the old really thin, brittle Fred Bear bleeder. I liked it because you could get it really sharp, but it would snap out of there when needed. All I really want out of my bleeders is to cut a big hole in the hide, and to cut a hole in the hide coming out the other side. If I hit like in the softer areas through ribs, I want that bleeder to hold up. If I hit a shoulder blade, I want it to break out the main blade going through. Now here's the tree shark glue on. Now these really do really well. Like I said, I have to do a lot of modification to the bleeder to get it to fit the wider ferrule of the glue on. But once it sets down in there, I like the fact that it sets so far down to the rear of the head. I think that's a good thing. It actually starts, when the bleeder starts applying friction to the hide, it pulls the hide in. So it actually allows the main blade to cut a bigger hole. This is the head that I set what I call the world record blood trail. It's the biggest blood trail I've ever seen. And this is the head that did it. The tree shark with the bleeder. I'm sure the great white will surpass that. And but anyway, I want to show you what I use when I slot these timber sharks. Like I said, I take the Dremel, take a rotary tool, take a little Dremel. I use these rotary blades right here. They're really thin, and I take it and turn it on, and I'm kind of not really precise. I've asked the machinist how to do this more precise. It's really hard to do this precision work. He really didn't offer me any good ideas. He said there's probably some jigs made, but right now I'm just getting down and eyeballing it. I'll turn the Dremel on, I'll eyeball, and I'll cut a little recess in that ferrule. When I get that recess cut, I'll put JB Weld in there. I'll mix up some JB Weld and I'll pack that slot back full of JB Weld. I'll let it set up a while, and then I'll insert my bleeders. And I'll show you what bleeders I'm using in this case. I use a regular, the old-fashioned razor blades. Now they got these at Walmart. These are the Vanderhagens. There's supposed to be some better ones or some really, really sharp ones I have to order online. What I do is I just take a pair of scissors and I eyeball these things and I try to cut them exactly half in two. They got markings there, they got a hole in the center, and I just snip them as close as possible in two, and then I'm going to snip them in two again right here, and then I'm going to make my cut from back to front. I'm going to zoom in on this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a cut from this corner right here to the back of this little hole right here. This kind of had a little circular place in there because I want a hard corner that'll catch where the ferrule and the arrow meet. It's a little bit hard getting started. All right, there we go. Right there. And then I'm going to snip that off. That'll give me a hard corner right there, and it'll give me some, I go by those markings where it'll be real precise. Now that don't look like much of a bleeder, but I'm not recessing these things very deep. I'm just recessing the ferrule just enough to get that bleeder in, just enough to where it'll hang on the arrow when it slides down in there. And I'll show you what one looks like when I get done with it. As small as those little bleeders look, once I get done cutting them out, when you get them glued in on the broadhead on that ferrule, which is, you know, a quarter of an inch, and you get them, you know, set in there, they're actually almost a perfect size bleeder. It makes it about an inch, almost an inch and a quarter bleeder, which I know it looks small on this Simmons because the Simmons are so huge, but it is a very sharp bleeder. The aggravating thing about it is once you get them glued in, you basically have to break them back out to sharpen the, you know, the main broadhead. You can kind of wiggle around it a little bit, and that's what I did with this one. And I've got it sharp enough to use, but it's not going to be quite as sharp as if I, you know, didn't have those bleeders in the way and I was really doing my initial sharpening. And that's what I'll do with most of my heads. I'll give it a good initial sharpening, then I'll slide it for bleeders, then I'll put the bleeders in, and I'll have the, you know, a perfectly good, super sharp head all the way around. Now you look on this great white, it's the same way. It has that short tip. The mass of the blade is behind where it screws on to the broadhead, so you get that short tip. So I didn't have room to put a slide in the blade, so I did it the same way. Slided the ferrule, put that bleeder. That's great white. It's humongous, like 2.25. Got about a 1.25 bleeder on it. I mean, that's massive. That's what I wanted, and that's what I got. And that sucker's really gonna do some damage. But anyway, that's what I use for bleeders. Use a combination of what Simmons makes. Have to modify them a little bit. Slot with my Dremel, depending on which type bleeder I'm gonna use. I may use the razor blade bleeder for when I'm slotting the ferrule. I use the Simmons bleeder when I'm slotting the blade, except on the tree shark where I slot the ferrule, I still use the Simmons bleeder. This is probably, the tree shark is probably my favorite application for using a bleeder because it just works so well. It's so easy to slot this thin ferrule. I don't give up any structural integrity with a blade, and I just pop the normal Simmons bleeder in there. I have to do a little modification on it, and it just really fits and works well. But anyway, that's what I wanted to show you on how I modify my Simmons and my bleeders. And about the only other modification I do, every now and then I'll sharpen the trailing edges on one. It's really not that necessary. But then I'll also single bevel the tips. And single beveling the tips, that's a real simple thing to do. You're just taking the very tip of the broadhead. You don't want to get on the whole blade. You want to come in at an angle on, I use this work sharp, come in at an angle, and I get on this right hand side, and I hit it a little, and I turn it, hit it on the other. I'm just working one side of the blade. And you do this enough, and you'll end up with a partial single bevel. It's not a full single bevel. It's just going to be a partial single bevel, where and that just gives you that flat tip that wedges in the bone. And because it's too, single bevel, it's going to kind of add rotation. I do it in a manner that where my fletching is turning arrow to the right. My single bevel tip, when it hits bone, it gives that initial twist and pries and pops the bone, and then the rest of it goes through. I just don't see any mechanical advantage of a single bevel on bone except that first eighth of an inch, maybe quarter of an inch at the most. After that, the bones exploded and got out of the way. So that's another little modification I do on my Simmons. Other than that, I just pretty much shoot them as is. I don't do anything. I got one more modification I want to do later, kind of a new little twist on them, but I'm gonna leave that for testing and show you that when I shoot something.